Okay, so now we're actually going to get into the training, and not just about the process, but the content behind the RBT certification. And we're going to start just going with an overview of applied behavior analysis, or what we're going to call ABA, throughout, and given the history of behaviorism and applied behavior analysis. So many of you are probably new to the field, don't know what ABA is. So what is ABA is the first question you probably have. Well, ABA technically is one of three branches of the science of behavior analysis. The other branch being the experimental analysis of behavior, and the second branch being behaviorism, or the philosophy of behavior. We are only going to concentrate on applied behavior analysis for this training, so you do not really need to know about those other two branches. As a science, ABA is a systematic approach to the understanding of behavior of social importance. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that we are really interested in understanding why behaviors occur. Why does a child throw a tantrum? Why does a child learn to read? Why does a child make friends? Why does that happen? So we're really interested in that. And we're interested in the social importance component. So it can't just be any behavior, something that's not meaningful to our clients, something that's not meaningful to our participants. It has to be something that produces a meaningful change for the clients or participants that we're working with. In terms of a practice, we are taking that science, we're applying that science into our clinical practice, and we're always looking to improve socially important behaviors. And so in this training, you're going to see a whole section dedicated to curriculum, where we talk about meaningful goals and how to teach these meaningful goals. We're always going to use ABA throughout to teach these meaningful goals. So we're looking directly at the environment and how that environment changes behavior, how that environment affects behavior. So it's always looking at the environment and the interaction of that environment to a child's behavior. Now for me, it's just a way of life. It's just a way of life. You have to have a certain level where you just believe in the science so much that's just your ways of life. Because for me, it comes down to I believe that the environment does contribute and help, and is the reason why individuals engage in certain behaviors. Whether that's a pro-social behavior, a behavior that we want to see improved, or an aberrant behavior, a behavior that we want to see being reduced. It's simply a way of life. So a lot of times I'll be in schools or at home, and they'll say, well, we want ABA for 60 minutes a day, or we want ABA 30 minutes a day, or we want ABA for 5 hours a day. And I never know what this means. Now, to me, I think what this means is that they want a certain type of ABA. They might want discrete child teaching, or they might want applied verbal behavior for a certain period of time. But reality is that it's just not time-based. It's just not like you're only doing ABA for 3 hours, you're only doing ABA for 30 minutes a day. If you believe in this philosophy, ABA is occurring throughout, because you're setting up the environment for where a child or their family can be successful. So for me, it's just a way of life. And ultimately, it's just really good teaching. I think some of the greatest teachers in the world, some of the greatest coaches in the world are doing behavior intervention. Now, they don't know that they're doing behavior intervention, but they certainly are. I look at college football coaches like Nick Saban or Urban Meyer back in the day, and he was clearly doing ABA and behavior intervention to help improve his players. I look at T-ball coaches. Now, my oldest son plays T-ball, and I'm a T-ball coach, and I will look at some of the good coaches in the league. And they're doing a great job of behavioral intervention. Now, none of them have had any training in behavioral intervention, none of them have taken a class in behavioral intervention, but they are doing just a great job of teaching. So what is good teaching? What is it that makes them doing such a good job? Now, I want to show you on this slide, just indicate that you're going to see that there's both the guy with the podium, and so there's going to be information on this slide that goes for the first RBT task list and the second RBT task list. And also on this slide, you see the Autism Partnership Method. And so this is important because this is also what we're endorsing in terms of intervention that should be implemented to individuals diagnosed with autism and their family. I'm not going to say this again, I just want to provide an additional prompt since this is the first time it comes up. So what is a good teacher? What is good teaching? Well, for me, the first thing is it provides motivation. Good teachers, good coaches want you to do better, and they make you want to do better. So they provide motivation for you to do better. I look at t-ball coaches, let's say, and what they are doing is that they are making it so it's reinforcing when you do a good hit, when you swing well, when you run the bases correctly, when you field correctly. I look at teachers, teachers who teach typically developing children, and I look at them when they're teaching reading and writing. They're providing motivation, whether that's through a kind of extrinsic or arbitrary motivation like stickers or praise, or whether they're really making the child feel like they're proud and engaged. They are providing motivation to their students. They're making sure that their students are really wanting to engage in the appropriate social behavior or the appropriate academic behavior. So the hallmark of good teaching is that you're just providing motivation. And good teachers do this, and it's also a hallmark of behavioral intervention. A second hallmark is that they provide clear and accurate feedback. And so I think it's really important that when you're working with children with autism, or you're working with typically developing children, or you're working on reading or writing or friendship development, that you're providing accurate feedback. So often today in society I see that a child's not really working hard. They're not listening. And we tell the child, oh, you did a nice job trying. Well, really? Did they really do a nice job trying? Or was it that they weren't trying their hardest? And if they weren't trying their hardest, you need to say, you know what, that's not your hardest. That's not you trying hard. Let's improve. How can we get better? So we want to be accurate. But we also want to be clear with our feedback. And this means we have to adjust our feedback based upon the learner. So there's some learners where you can give far more detailed feedback because they can absorb it, they understand it, they can comprehend it, and they can change their behavior. There's other times when we're working with individuals that we cannot give as clear feedback, or not give as detailed feedback. The feedback needs to be clear, but it can't be as detailed. So we have to adjust and make sure that we're giving both the clear and accurate feedback when we're teaching our learners. A hallmark of good teaching, and also a hallmark of applied behavior analysis. Third, we want to provide assistance. Good teachers provide assistance, what we call prompting or prompts and prompt fading. When someone's not getting a concept, when they're struggling with a concept, when a concept is novel to the learner, that's when we are going to provide that assistance. We are going to help them in a variety of ways, whether it's that we're modeling the correct behavior, whether that's we're highlighting what the correct behavior it is, whether we're pointing to the correct response, whether we're asking someone else who knows what the correct response is and then having them follow through with it. We are really wanting to provide assistance to that learner. Good teachers do this all the time. Good teachers break down skills and make sure that the child's going to be successful. But the important part of this is when necessary. When necessary is critical. We do not want to just provide prompts and provide assistance to learners when they don't need it. That's what we call over-prompting or over-teaching. They don't need that assistance, and we should not be in there providing assistance when unnecessary. So we need to be sure that we're providing assistance only when it's necessary, and that we're not over-prompting, not over-providing that assistance, because that, at the end of the day, does not develop independence. And what we really want to do with our learners is make sure that they're independent. For any child, any adult, any adolescent, we don't want them that they're dependent on us. They should not be looking for the instruction from the teacher, from the behavior analyst, from the registered behavior technician. Whether they should be engaging in pro-social behaviors independently. So if we provide motivation, if we provide clear and accurate feedback, and we provide assistance only when necessary, this ensures that we will make our children develop independence, that they can do it by themselves. A final hallmark of good teaching is that you adjust teaching strategies based upon the child. What we're not endorsing throughout this talk is a cookbook approach. And so often in the field of autism, what we're seeing is a cookbook approach. That everyone follows the same protocol regardless of the child. So if I have one protocol, I'm going to do it for Johnny. If I have another child, I'm going to do the same protocol for him. I have a third child, I'm going to do the same protocol. So it's not individualized. But we know that every child, every adolescent, every adult that we work with has their own needs, has their own strengths, their own limitations, their own weaknesses. So we as teachers, we as behavior analysts really have to adjust based upon the learner. And so adjusting teaching strategies is critical. And if you look at good teachers and good coaches, they adjust their teaching strategies based upon the child. They're not just doing the same approach for every child. So I'm going to now show you a short video of what I consider good teaching. This teacher is a math teacher at Los Angeles Unified School District. He teaches high school math, and he is simply, to me, a really good teacher. So why don't we watch the video and see.
George, secant pi. No. -1, down, George. Tangent 5 pi over 6.
Kids call me Cal, Mr. Cal, and Cal kind of fits into what I do. I teach calculus.
Definite integral here, -2 to 2 of x squared minus 4 dx.
So when I became a teacher, I decided that, you know what, math can be made fun, dynamic, energetic.
Come. Very good. Go. 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 Keep face down. Keep face down. Good morning, families. It's good to see you. There's no place I'd rather be right here watching you become world champion.
Mr. Calavita is he's a great teacher, and that class atmosphere is different from any other class I've taken before.
No, ones go. 180, got it right there. Yeah, got it. Here we go. State the definition of the derivative. I didn't understand what you said.
Mr. Cal has really great methods in that we find his classes and his lectures to be very interesting, and we don't get bored. It doesn't make it at all dull. We'll use flashcards to test between girls and guys.
Second fundamental theorem of calculus. Got it! Yes, both ladies down.
We'll do theorems and we'll do trig functions. We've learned to do trig, to do any trig function within like 1 second.
Here we go. Ready, set, go. Extreme value theorem. No.
Mean value theorem.
Got it. Mean value theorem. Here we go.
First derivative test.
Got it. Yeah, very good.
It's very hard to get up and stand in front of the world's toughest critics, which is kids, every single day, and have them weigh your performance every single day, let alone all the other constraints that come onto you administratively and whatnot.
Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful day, Mr. Cal. Thank you so much. Please be dismissed. Thank you.
I watch this video every week. I present so often. I see this video probably weekly, if not more. And I'm always amazed by this video. I mean, maybe it's because one of my biggest fears is having to take math class again. So when I was in high school, I definitely didn't get to calculus. I probably got to algebra, geometry, whatever you need. I remember in college deliberately failing a pre-math test to get placement so I wouldn't have to be in more advanced math because I hate math. I hate working and doing those math tests and skills, and it's just not my area of strength. I dread when my children are going to be in these kind of classes. But I watched Mr. Cal and I would take his class. It's something that I would go into. And it's because he's such a good teacher. He's just such a good teacher. And I look at it and see what components he has of being a good teacher. And how can we relate what we just saw in the video from Mr. Cal to when we work with individuals diagnosed with autism. For me, the number one thing is they're fun. Mr. Cal is just fun. He is breaking a skill like calculus, which has to be one of the most boring skills in the world. Sorry for anyone here or anyone watching that loves calculus. But he breaks it and he makes it in a fun way. It is so motivating to his students. He's just having fun. And when we work with children with autism, we have to be fun too. A lot of the clients that we work with don't want to be there. They don't want to receive the teaching. They're not interested in being with us. And so the more fun that we can be, the better the teaching will go. So for me, the first component of a good teacher is being fun. The second is that they're receptive. And I mean this for the newest teacher or the newest registered behavior technician to the most seasoned behavior analyst today. It is so important that you are receptive. And what I mean by receptive is that you both accept the feedback and then change based upon the feedback. So it's not enough that you just say, yeah, that's good, thank you for telling me, and then don't change the based on that feedback. You have to be receptive to when someone is giving you feedback and change your behavior based on on what they said. All too often I see registered behavior technicians or behavior analysts who are not receptive. And if you're not receptive, you're not going to improve. You're not going to improve upon your technique. You're not going to improve upon your skill. You're not going to improve on how to implement behavioral intervention and therefore not improve the lives of individuals diagnosed with autism and their families. A third component of being a good teacher is that you're systematic. And every registered behavior technician, every RBT, every behavior analyst needs to be systematic. And what I mean by systematic is they have to have a game plan. You go into a session working with a child or an adolescent or adult, you have to have a game plan. This game plan has to include what you want to teach and how you want to teach it, what reinforcers you want to use, what instructions you want to provide. You have a game plan of what you hope to accomplish for that session, whether it's a 30-minute session, a 3-hour session, an all-day session. But more importantly is you're adaptable and flexible. So you have that game plan, but you can change the game plan on a dime. You can change the game plan based upon the needs of the learner. So you have that game plan, but that might change within that session. Another component is that you're objective, that you're an objective RBT, that you're an objective behavior analyst. You want to look at what's actually being there and what you see through data and data collection, data analysis. You're not making subjective guesses of why behavior is occurring or what's going to be the most effective. You are making analytical and objective analysis of what is occurring, what's not occurring, and how to make improvements. So being objective and analytical is really important. If you watch Mr. Cal, he's really engaging. He is just super, super engaging. And I think this is important. And this is important especially if we work with young children diagnosed with autism, that we have to be engaging. And part of the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder is that they have impairments, qualitative impairments in social behavior, which means that they might not want to be next to you. They might not want to interact with you. They might not want to hang out with you. And that is fine. But the way that we can turn that, the way that we can increase that social behavior is for you to be engaging. So teachers that are not engaging, teachers that are kind of boring or stiff, that's not the greatest. So a component of being a good teacher and a component of being a good RBT is that you're engaging. You also have to be professional. You have to be professional at all times. And my colleague Julia Ferguson is going to talk about ethics here. But part of professional is how you dress. So right now you can see I'm giving a lecture, it's being recorded, I'm dressed in a suit. That's professional for this setting. But if I'm working with a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old on social behavior, and we're going out to lunch and working on how to go out to lunch and ordering, this would be unprofessional. This would be stigmatizing. That's an example. So your dress is important. What's also important as professional is the relationships you have. As an RBT, you should not be having those dual relationships. You should not be Facebook friends or Instagram friends with the clients or the client's parents. That's not professional. How you talk to parents, how you talk to teachers, how you talk to administrators, how you talk to others in other professions, that's also important in terms of being professional. And that's a key feature of being a good RBT. Now for me, if you're working at Autism Partnership or Autism Partnership Foundation, I want you to be a tireless worker. Now legally I can't say this, but I want you to work more than 9 to 5. And I want this because we have children's lives in our hands. The decisions that we make have long-term impact for the children that we're working with. So I want our staff, our RBTs, to not just be here for a job. They're just not here for a paycheck, but they're here to improve upon themselves so that they understand the field of applied behavior analysis. So they understand the field of behaviorism. So they understand individuals with autism. So they understand how typically developing children learn and grow. And so for this, you have to be a tireless worker. This can't just be a 9 to 5 job, because I believe if it's just a 9 to 5 job, we're doing a disservice to the clients that we serve. Good RBTs, good teachers are also creative. And they're creative especially when it comes to how to teach and curriculum. There are so many skills that we have to teach individuals with autism. There are so many skills that we have to teach typically developing children. And if we were just to look at curriculum books, we're not going to find all those skills. If we were just to look at curriculum books of how to teach, we're not going to find all the ways to teach. We need our staff to be creative. And one of the hallmarks of the Autism Partnership Method is that our staff are creative, whether it's an RBT or a behavior analyst at the doctoral level. We need them to be creative. And by this, they can try new programs. They can try new ways to teach. Now they should be taking data on it and should be objective and adjusting the teaching, adjusting the programs based upon that data. But we want them to be creative. We also want them to be reinforcing, right? We want them to become what we call a condition reinforcer. At the end of the day, what we want is that the students really want to work with our teachers, with our RBTs. A motto that we used to say is they might be coming in crying into the session. We want them crying when they leave the session. We don't actually want them crying when they leave the session, but we want them to love being in the session, love working with the teacher so much that they don't want to leave. Because that teacher, that RBT, has become so reinforcing to the child. We also want our staff, and this goes for RBTs, to be widely competent. We want them to know everything about what's going on. We do not believe that RBTs should just be following a protocol or procedure blindly and have no knowledge of that protocol. They need to know the principles behind that protocol. They need to know all about ABA. They need to know all about behaviorism. They need to know all about science and research. They need to know about curriculum and autism and typically developing children. They need to know about schools. They need to know families. We need staff to be widely competent. And part of the reason why we're providing this training both here in Seal Beach and through the camera and video is because we see that the competency levels become so narrow. It's become so minimal that it's just not acceptable to us. It's not acceptable for the children who are receiving intervention currently. And so we want to make sure that RBTs are becoming widely competent, and our hope is after this 40 hours that this will start into RBTs becoming more widely competent. Part of this is understanding big picture versus little picture. RBTs have to understand the big picture and the little picture. For example, when we talk about sharing, why are we teaching sharing? We're not just teaching sharing so that our children can give over a toy. That's really stupid. That's really dumb if they were just teaching that. No one would like to share. For me, why would I want to share my wine with people? I really like wine. Wine tastes really good. If I give it over to my friends, then I'm not getting what I really like. Well, that's a little picture thing. The big picture of why we share is because it can create friendships and meaningful relationships. So by teaching sharing, we can ensure that our children are going to create those friendships and those meaningful relationships and have a high quality of life. So whatever the program is, our RBTs need to know both the little picture of why you're teaching it now and the big picture of why you're teaching it in the long term. That's important. We need to be child-driven. We're there for the child and ways to improve upon the child. We need to follow the child's lead at some time. We're there for the children. We're not there for ourselves. I didn't get in this field to be here for myself. I got in this field to improve the lives of individuals, of children, and their families. That's why everyone should be in this field. That means on team meetings, if you have them as an RBT, or clinics, it's not about highlighting how good you are or what you're contributing to the team. It's making sure that you're highlighting what the child's doing and how we can improve the life of that child. Child-driven is critical. And finally, we have to have good conceptual history. We think it's important for RBTs to know where we came from. This means not just looking at a single book and finding out all the information in that book on our field. This means looking at the research, both the recent research and the research from the past, the research from the 50s and the 60s, the 70s and the 80s. We need to make sure that RBTs understand our field and the conceptual history of our field. It's also important so that they're not reinventing the wheel, because there's been many, many brilliant professionals in our field throughout the decades that would really understand our field and contribute to our field. And those contributions can still be used today. We know with quality staff that you are going to get optimal progress, that children are going to make those meaningful differences and those meaningful gains. And those meaningful gains are going to be individualized to the learner. For some, it means that they will speak in few words. For others, it's that they're fully conversational. For some, it means that they have one close friend. For others, that they're friendly with a lot of people. They're the popular kids. For some, they're gonna learn their letters and numbers. For others, they're gonna read and write. But optimal progress does not come unless staff are well trained. And I want to once again highlight, well trained does not simply mean that you are attending today and that you're watching the video for 40 hours. That is not the definition of well-trained for me. Well-trained means that you're able to have this knowledge and perform it. That you're actually able to perform it with the children that you're working with. And when you perform it, you can do it to a high degree of fidelity, meaning you're doing the procedures correctly. And if you're doing in-the-moment assessment or clinical judgment, which we'll get to, that you're able to do that with a high degree of fidelity. It is absolutely critical that if we're going to make progress for the children, the clients that we serve, that our staff are well-trained and that they're doing it with a high degree of fidelity. Now, I already talked about the characteristics of the quality staff, but the other one I want to say is it's not what we can bring our staff to do, but whether what they can whether what they can be brought to do. So I want to say that again. It's not what staff can be brought to say, but whether what they can do. And this is a quote from Bear, Wolf, and Risley in '68, which has really started our field. I don't care if a staff can pass a multiple choice exam. That's great. But if they can pass a multiple choice exam but they don't know how to implement discrete triad teaching, that's problematic. If they can pass a multiple choice exam but they don't know how to condition and reinforce it, that's problematic. It's not what the staff can be brought to say, but be brought to do. So part of the RBT, part of getting your RBT is passing a multiple choice exam. And that's good. And you guys should be able to pass a multiple choice exam after this training. But it's more important that you can actually do the work with individuals diagnosed with autism. And finally, a certificate does not mean you're qualified. I want to say that again, and it's highlighted in red. A certificate does not mean you're qualified. All the RBT represents is minimal. And you're going to see what we really think about it, minimal standards of the field. That goes to the same with a BCABA or BCBA. It is minimal standards of the field. You are qualified when you can implement a ton of procedures across a ton of children to a high degree of fidelity. So I know this is a downer for some, but just getting the certification does not mean that you're qualified. You are qualified when you can perform all the tasks on the RBT task list, as well as additional tasks that we're going to go with a high degree of fidelity. So this is kind of the overview of applied behavior analysis, but I really want to spend some time going on the history of applied behavior analysis and talking about our forefathers and our foremothers, the one that have set the way and their contributions to the field. So what we hear a lot of times is that our field is new. We're a new field. It is a standard, or is a quote that's said often. I don't believe this to be true. Now, I believe that certification is a new field. And I believe that certification has only been around for a short period of time. But our field has been around for a very long time. In fact, when I was in graduate school, people used to say that Plato and Aristotle were really the foundations of our field. I'm not going to go that far. I'm going to talk about this man, Edward Thorndike, and his contributions. And to start off, I'm going to show a video of Edward Thorndike.
But how is a new skill learned? That was a question which began to fascinate Thorndike. To answer it, he built some ingenious puzzle boxes from which cats could only escape by operating latches.
And in you go.
The cat appears to be very clever in engineering its escape, solving the problem with a deftly placed paw and a push of its nose. But Thorndike didn't believe that an animal, even a clever cat, understands the consequences of its behavior. When he placed a cat in the puzzle box for the first time, Thorndike was unable to see any evidence of flashes of insight. The successful actions appeared first by chance. He proved that the apparent cleverness arose by trial and error, and used graphs to measure the rate of learning. A well-practiced cat quickly recalls the actions that help it escape to its reward of food. If an action brings a reward, Thorndike believed that that action becomes stamped into the mind. In his thesis, he explained further his ideas about learning, that behavior changes because of its consequences. He called this his law of effect, which explained how even wild creatures develop new habits.
So that video shows some of the work of Thorndike, and I think he's one of the early contributors into the field. Most importantly, what they just concluded on the law of effect. And it's really showing that consequences, both positive consequences and negative consequences, have an effect on behavior. It changes behavior. So the things that you like, the rewards, or what we later will term as reinforcers, change behavior, increases behavior. And those things that we dislike, punishers, and stuff of that nature, decrease undesirable behavior. So law of effect is huge. And this was a really first step of showing that behavior can be changed by consequences. Behavior can be changed by the environment. It's not just everything that you have inside of you, but it's what's going on throughout that environment. He also talked about things like learning curves and law of recency. So showing the rate of learning and how learning can be expedited, and how if you do a routine over and over, engage in a behavior over and over, how quickly you can learn a new behavior. And so this was huge in terms of how people learn. Trial and error learning also, and really talking about how when you get rewards, how that behavior is changed, and when you don't get rewards, how the behavior is not changed. Critical. And to me, one of the most important parts that he talked about is all mammals learn in a similar manner. Meaning that this is a science. It's not just a science for cats or dogs or guinea pigs or whatever, but that all mammals are learning in the same manner. Now I want to say this does not mean that we treat humans the way we treat dogs. This does not mean that we treat humans the way we treat cats. All it means is that humans, cats, dogs, fish, whales, whatever it may be, all learn through their environment. Their environment plays a factor in their learning. So I want to be really clear, because there's an anti-ABA movement out there that says this is just dog training or cat training. That's not what we're endorsing. What I'm endorsing here is that the environment plays a big role in how humans learn, how mammals learn in general. And so a lot of this can be contributed to Thorndike. From Thorndike, we move to Pavlov. And Pavlov was not a behavior analyst when he started. He was not looking for any of the contributions that he has today. And so I'm going to show you a brief video of Ivan Pavlov.
Behavioral psychologists have come up with new views, not only of animal behavior, but of human nature as well. And these views all concern a process that we take for granted, learning, because we are all truly born to learn. Ironically, one of the most important figures in the study of learning, Ivan Pavlov, wasn't concerned with the subject at all, at least not at first. Pavlov, a noted Russian scientist, won the Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine in 1904. As this original footage shows, Pavlov was initially interested in digestion and the action of the salivary glands. By diverting the saliva of dogs into test tubes, he could precisely measure if and how much they salivated during digestion. When food was presented, the dogs salivated quickly, an inherited salivary reflex. But over repeated testings, a strange thing happened. The dogs salivated before contact with the food. Just the sight of the food was enough to stimulate their drooling. Then, just seeing the food dish, or even hearing the footsteps of Pavlov or his assistants, was enough to trigger this built-in reflex. What was going on to elicit this response? Pavlov decided to find out by systematically varying the stimuli and measuring the dog's reaction. Metronomes, lights, and bells were all used as stimuli, and they all worked as stand-ins for the food. What mattered was not the kind of stimulus that was used, but the fact that it reliably signaled that food was on the way. Pavlov had discovered a fundamental type of learning called classical conditioning. An original stimulus elicits an automatic unlearned response. Both stimulus and response happen naturally. They are unconditioned. Then a second, neutral stimulus that never elicits the unconditioned response by itself is introduced just before the presentation of the original stimulus. If the neutral or signaling stimulus is presented alone, and a response occurs as if the original stimulus were still there, we say that conditioning has taken place. The arbitrary neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus. The reverse is also true. Pavlov and others studied the extinction over time of such conditioned responses. When the subject learns that the conditioned stimulus no longer signals a desired event, the acquisition process is reversed, as the learned connection is gradually weakened. Pavlov's work, and the work of those who followed him, led to a remarkable conclusion, and that is, any stimulus an organism can perceive is capable of eliciting any reaction the organism is capable of making. This means that virtually any sound, sight, or smell can influence the way our muscles tense or relax, our moods fluctuate, or even the way our attitudes are formed. For instance, if I say, relax, and then do this, you're going to be startled and upset. After 5 or 6 pairings of relax, just saying the word relax is going to generate a negative response rather than its usual learned reaction.
So once again, Pavlov just showing us how the environment affects behavior and what we do in the environment, how we can manipulate the environment, how that can change learning for individuals that we work with. And so as the video talked about, this is ultimately referred to as classical conditioning or respondent conditioning. And it's taking unconditioned stimuluses and responses and how the conditioned stimulus can change behavior over time. What's come out of it, and I'm not going to go into any detail because this is far beyond what an RBT needs to know and far beyond the RBT task list, is that the types of conditioning is out there. And so there's multiple ways that we can condition behavior using classical conditioning for individuals diagnosed with autism or other clients that we're working with. One of the big contributions out of this is a procedure known as systematic desensitization, which is really used for phobias and fears and stuff like that. And so systematic desensitization has been used to help multiple clients, individuals with autism or without autism, conquer their fears, is a simple way to put it. Really work on reducing their phobias. So Pavlov really talked about this nicely in that video, but it's really that unconditioned stimulus creates an unconditioned response. So in this example, it's the food to salivation. And then what Pavlov did was do a conditioned stimulus through a conditioned response. So what would eventually happen is the bell creates the salivation. Now, a bell for a dog does not naturally create salivation. It's that change in the environment. So these principles, though Pavlov did with a dog, can really be done for any mammal. We can take things into the environment and really condition them for certain responses. So whether that's a negative response, like a phobia, so if people are fearful of clowns, you just don't naturally get fearful of clowns. There has to be some pairing that happened to be afraid of clowns, or something more positive. Those things, the conditioned stimuluses, playing with the unconditioned stimuluses, will create the conditioned response. So the work of Pavlov is paramount in what we do. And so is the work of John B. Watson and his work. Now for me, as I will say probably again, he is the father of behaviorism. So let's watch a little video of John B. Watson.
In the early part of the 20th century, psychologists John Watson and Rosalie Rayner set out to teach a baby boy called Little Albert to fear white rats using the principle of classical conditioning. This is a film of their work. The The film shows several phases of their study. First, as you see here, the investigators demonstrated that prior to conditioning, little Albert had no fears of any animals, including, of course, white rats. Watson and Rayner then sought to teach Albert to fear white rats through classical conditioning. In the conditioning phase of the study, which was not filmed, the investigators struck a steel bar with a hammer whenever Albert reached for a rat, making a very loud noise that greatly upset and frightened Albert. After 6 such pairings of the loud noise and the rat, it was believed that the boy had been conditioned to fear white rats. That is, Albert was now expected to react fearfully to white rats, whether the rats were paired with loud noises or not. In this next film sequence, we see Albert interacting with a white rat after the conditioning process. The investigators believed that the child's reaction during this trial demonstrated his newly acquired fear of white rats. Finally, the investigators expected that little Albert's conditioned fear of white rats would generalize to stimuli that were similar in key ways to a white rat. In this film segment, they were trying to demonstrate that the child now also reacted fearfully to similar objects, such as a rabbit, a dog, a furry object, and a white mask worn by Watson himself.
So that's the Little Albert experiment. It's famous. I think many people have probably heard that, whether you're in RBT or getting your RBT or not. It's in a lot of psychology classes and even in high school psychology classes as well. I do want to dispel a myth that Little Albert went into a mental institution or committed suicide. That's just not factually correct. Little Albert became quite okay after his experiments. Though I do have to say that experiments should not be done today. It's kind of a different time and you have to put in the time frame that was conducted in. So as I said, he's the father of behaviorism. He wrote the Behavior Manifesto way back in the 1920s. He is really what started everything we do today. He really helped push it further in motion. He talked greatly about conditioned emotional responding. And so he talked about how emotions are conditioned, whether it's emotion of happiness, sad, angry, fearful. He was really talking about emotional respondents and how that plays into learning. For me, I think what he was really beneficial and known for is he took this field of psychology and turned it on its head. A lot of psychology about that day was about the mind and what was going in the mind. So you had Freud going around there talking about the id, the ego, the superego, and talking about those kind of emotions and talking about what was happening from the inside. Watson comes along, and what he really talks about is about objective behavior and objectively learning in the environment, objectively recording data, and objectively understanding and evaluating data in the environment. So he was really a renegade in a sense, is he took what was going on in psychology and changed that. What was going on that would no longer occur or not be just the only way that psychology can be viewed. He made it really a behavioral psychology. He also talked a lot about a language and how language is developed and how language really comes from the environment and that the contributions that the environment has on language development. He's also known for quite a few quotes, which I'm going to show you and read to you. I'm sorry for reading directly. But the behaviors, one quote was, "The behaviors cannot find consciousness in the test tube of science." This was controversial back then. This was really controversial. He's saying it's not about your consciousness, and that's not what's changing behavior, that you can't study it. It cannot be a science. What he once again here is referring to is that science has to be based on objectable and measurable facts. And facts are important. And so to have a science, it's not about consciousness or things that are going on without being aware. It has to be what's going and being objective and what's being measurable, what's happening in that moment. This is an important quote. His other quote, which is also used a lot and talked about a lot, is the following: "There are for us no instincts. We no longer need the term in psychology. Everything we've been in the habit of calling an instinct today is a result of largely of training, belonging to man's learned behavior." So a lot of times we hear instinct. We still hear it today. It's a popular term. Whether it's mother's instincts or mother's intuition or father's intuition or coach's instinct. And instincts are important. He's saying no. It's not about instincts. It's not that you're born with mother's intuition or father's intuition. Sorry to all the mothers and fathers out there. It's about your history. It's about your history with the environment. It's about your learning history. And your learning history is what drives your behavior. It's what changes your behavior. So instinct is a word they say we should not use as a scientist. And it's really something that we should not be really using as a behavior analyst or registered behavior technician. And then his most controversial quote. The quote that's most controversial, the quote that's well known, I'm going to read it. He says, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well informed, and my own specified world, in which to bring them up and I'll guarantee to take anyone at random and train them to become any type of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant, chief, and yes, even a beggar man and thief. Regardless of his talents, his penchants, his tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors." What he's saying is that the environment alone can change behavior. And this is a really controversial statement. It's been used to go for behavior intervention. It's used to be anti-behavior intervention. And the thing is, it's impossible to determine. Because what it really boils down to is obviously biology plays into it, but so does the environment. And what's so difficult and what's misinterpreted is he says very clearly in the first sentence, "Give me a dozen healthy infants." So he's saying if your biology is fine, if your makeup is fine, this is what can happen. He's not saying for those who might be impacted, who might have autism spectrum disorder, who might have cognitive difficulties or language difficulties. He's saying dozen healthy infants. So he's saying that the biology is important. But if he has those healthy infants, that the environment can train them to be what they want the person to be. Now the hard part of this also is there's no way of knowing. Because to do this, you have to have a perfect environment. You have to be in control of everything that person does 24/7. And if you're not, then there's other factors that come in. There's what's called confounding variables, and my colleague Joe will talk about that in terms of when he goes over terminology of our field. So it's really impossible to know. It's the closest that we've come is a movie called The Truman Show, which was conducted by Jim Carrey, but it's or not conducted, which was acted by Jim Carrey. He's the star of it. But in The Truman Show, Jim Carrey's character, Truman, is in this like world where everyone's controlled. It's a TV show, and every interaction is scripted. And the director of the show really navigates his whole life. That's the closest that we've come, and that's a movie. So who knows what would happen? The other part is there's a part of the quote that's always left out, and it is, "I'm going beyond my facts, and I admit it. But so have the advocates of the contrary, and they have been doing it for many thousands of years." So what he's saying here is that he has no data to support this, and it's very clear he has no data to support this. But those who are just proponents that it's all biology, all just nature, that they're going without any evidence that's all nature, and that he is just bringing another way of doing it. So what it really comes down is that kind of nature and nurture effect. Okay, so we go from John B. Watson to another historical figure in or science, and that is B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner is probably the most widely talked about behavior analyst and most known in our field. And I'm going to show you a little video of him.
Hello, I'm Murray Sidman. About a year ago, Davidson Films asked me if I would help them to prepare and narrate a film about the life and accomplishments of B.F. Skinner. He taught us that we are what we do, but more to the point, he taught us that we can change what we do for the better.
I remember when I first started working with rats in my first experiments, I would arrange an experiment, and I would expect to get a certain shaped curve. I wouldn't get that, and I would get so furious. Why don't you do what you're supposed to do? And then I realized finally, nature to be commanded must be obeyed. The rat is always right.
Skinner at Harvard was soon putting his mechanical skills to work. Skinner proposed that the critical relation between behavior and environment can be conceived of as a contingency of reinforcement. Contingent means dependent on. It defines an if-then relation. If the pigeon in this chamber pecks the lighted disc, it then gets food. This pigeon's behavior has been shaped into ringing the bell by requiring closer approximations to the desired behavior before giving it food. The second thing Skinner realized was that the sequence of events here was just the reverse of what happened in Pavlovian conditioning. Pavlov got his dog to salivate in response to a stimulus, the metronome. Pavlov's and Watson's work led to a stimulus-response psychology that many have recognized as too simplified and mechanistic to account for the great variety of human behavior. But Skinner got his animal to peck a disc not by presenting it with a stimulus beforehand, but instead by presenting a consequence afterward. The important event here was the food that came after the animal pecked the disc. This was no longer stimulus-response psychology. If anything, it was response-stimulus psychology. By adding the third term, discriminative stimulus, to the reinforcement contingency, along with response and consequence, Skinner greatly broadened the applicability of operant conditioning. The three-term contingency is the basic unit of operant behavior. Now, Skinner's work was about behavior, initially that of lab animals, but with more and more applications to humans in ever larger groups. Although the focus of his science was always on individuals, his later writings dealt with how we, through understanding our own behavior, could restructure social systems to improve life for ourselves and for the planet Earth. Skinner's interest in how environments shape human interactions and how human life can be improved by the application of behavior analysis can perhaps best be seen in his own environment, a basement study which he designed to support the writing that was the focus of his life. He was his own best human subject.
Skinner is an absolute giant in our field, and so much of the work that we do today and that's being implemented to individuals with autism can be reflected by what Skinner's early contributions are. He's also one of the most prolific behavior analysts that have ever existed, writing numerous books, chapters, and various research empirical studies. As the video showed, one of his big contributions was taking it from that two-term contingency that we just talked about with Pavlov to a three-term contingency. Some would argue fourth contingency with MOs being placed. Dr. Xian will get to that terminology later on. but the three-term contingency, where behavior is shaped not only by the antecedents, those that come before the behavior, but also by the consequences. So whether you're getting reinforced or punished for a certain behavior, that's going to influence the future occurrence of that behavior that you are engaging in. So this was huge. This is groundbreaking. This is really showing that how much consequences play in shaping of human behavior. He worked on concepts like satiation and deprivation. So when you're deprived of a certain item, when you're deprived of a certain stimuli, that it's going to become more powerful. You're going to work more for that. And when you're satiated, when you've had a lot of it and you don't really want it, it's going to become less powerful, less motivating, and therefore you're not going to work as hard to achieve that kind of stimuli. One of the other huge contributions, which we'll talk about in a later module, is shaping. And just how we shape behaviors, that we cannot just teach a whole behavior to children, we have to shape it over time, which means we really have to teach smaller approximations of the behavior until the child, the client, is engaging in the targeted desired behavior. One of his other major contributions was the analysis of verbal behavior, where he really showed how verbal behavior is learned through interactions with the environment. Now, Skinner thought this was so important because it gave a complete understanding of human behavior. Up until this point, verbal behavior, language was really the part that was missing. This gave that complete picture. And so a lot of the interventions that we do today, where we're teaching children to expressively label items, where we're teaching children to match, where we're teaching children to engage in conversations, can be somewhat contributed to the analysis of verbal behavior. And then finally, another big major area was in cultural selection, where he talked about how the culture that one is raised up in really impacts their behavior. And this is important because we have to be really aware of one's cultures and the cultures that we worked in. So this is really another important contribution. So from Skinner, we go to what I consider the Holy Trinity. Now I consider it the Holy Trinity because I got my PhD at the University of Kansas, and these three professionals, these three behavioral gods came from the University of Kansas, and that is Don Baer sitting right there, Montrose Wolf sitting in the middle, and Todd Risley. And they came from the University of Washington, really in the work of Sid Bijou's lab at the University of Washington. And they traveled to the University of Kansas to start an ABA program in Lawrence, Kansas. And when they were starting the ABA program, they also started the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, where a lot of our research has come throughout the years. And it was this paper that led the way. It was this paper in 1968 in the very first issue, the very first volume of the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, where Baer, Wolf, and Risley showed us and helped define what some of the current dimensions of applied behavior analysis were. Now in this paper, they go through 7 dimensions of applied behavior analysis, and I'll get to that in a moment. But to me, the most important word of this paper is in the title, and it's the very first word. It's the word sum. And I think this is critical because it means that they didn't know all the dimensions. They were not proclaiming that these are the only 7 dimensions of applied behavior analysis. Rather, these are just the 7 dimensions of the current time. These are the 7 dimensions that they could come up with right now, meaning that there could be others later. So, I want to go back. I encourage everyone to read this article. Whether you're an RBT, a BCBA, a BCABA, BCBAD, graduate school, high school diploma, whatever it may be. It's really imperative that you read this article because I think it does such a nice job of highlighting what is important to our field. So here are the 7 dimensions of applied behavior analysis, or some of the current dimensions of applied behavior analysis. I will not go into the detail right now. I will get to them in a second, but I just want to lay them out. First, it's applied. Second, it's behavior. Third, it's analytic. Fourth, it's technological. Fifth, it's conceptually systematic. Sixth, it's effective. And 7th, generality. These are the current dimensions that Baer, Wolf, and Risley laid out in 1968. They wrote another paper in 1987, and they said that these are still the current dimensions of applied behavior analysis. These dimensions are critical. They are what absolutely defines what our field is and should be. As an RBT, you need to learn these dimensions. You need to know them inside and out, and I would bet that they are on the test that you need to pass to get your RBT certification. So let's go over them in a little bit more detail. Applied. Questions come up all the time of what makes something applied and what makes something important. Once again, applied means that it's socially significant to the learner. It's something that's important to the learner that you're working with. Whether that's in a research study or in clinical practice, it's what's important to them, what's going to make a socially significant difference. So a lot of times in terms of clinical practice, we see targets that are being applied, and targets that are not applied. For example, I think it's important and applied for many learners if we teach them who their mom are or who their dad is. Or a non-applied target would be things like different dog breeds or state flags or cat breeds. Stuff that we see, unfortunately, sometimes in the research literature today. So it's really important that it's something applied for that learner. It's also different than general psychology, which a lot of times work on large global constructs or theories that really does not help the learner, the specific learner. Within applied behavior analysis, we want to be sure that we're always targeting the specific learner, that we're always looking out for the good of that learner. So that's the first aspect, first dimension of applied behavior analysis. Second is behavioral. And I'm going to say the quote again. I know I just did it a little while ago, but what behavioral to me means is that we can be brought to do rather than what they can be brought to say. This is so important. It is what you can do. It is what you as a practitioner can do. It is what the learner can do, not what they say they can do. For example, if I said right now I can hit a 90-mile-per-hour fastball, none of you guys in this room, none of you watching the video should think that I could hit a 90-mile-per-hour fastball. So if we just measured what I say I can do, it would be inaccurate. It's a failure of say-do correspondence. If our children say that they have friends but never interact with another peer, then they don't have friends. It's not what they have. If an adolescent can say that they can do arithmetic, but when you give them problems, they can never answer it correctly, they're not doing it. So we're more concerned about what our clients can do, what our learners can do, than what they say they can do. We also ensure that we are observing this behavior through precise measurement. We don't want to be subjective here. We want to be objective. We want to make sure that the behavior is increasing or decreasing over time, and that we're capturing it with accurate and reliable data collection. Now, we also have to be careful about whose behaviors change, because there's times that we might think that the learner's behaviors change, but really it's us who change. It's our expectations that have changed. I'll take a perfect example with my son, Alex, my oldest son, who I love, but can sometimes, we'll say he gets a devilish smile. He becomes the tyrant in our family. And so sometimes it looks like Alex is being more behaved than usual. He's being compliant, he's listening to instructions, he's being the sweet, loving child that he usually is. But in bad weeks, sometimes we think that this is happening. Well, is it that actually during a week when Alex is not listening and not behaving, that he's making improvements on a daily basis? Or is it that we, myself and my wife, have changed our expectations? Have we made things a little easier? Have we made things where we're not providing as much feedback? Have we made the demands easier? So we always have to look to see if it's the child that changed or if it's the staff changing their expectation, and therefore really where the client is not making the changes. The third is analytic. We want to make sure that we are showing a behavioral demonstration that's believable, something that's important, something that's believable, and we do this through precise measurement. Now, in Baer, Wolf, and Risley, they're talking about experimental designs. They're talking about what's known as a baseline period and an intervention period. A baseline period is prior to the targeted intervention, okay? It does not mean the absence of anything. What it means is that you're not implementing your intervention that you're planning on. And you're seeing what kind of behavior the child, the adolescent, the adult exhibits. Intervention is when you're implementing your desired, your targeted intervention. So you're kind of seeing at this point if your targeted intervention, otherwise known as an independent variable, is changing behavior, known as a dependent variable. So let's take an example. Let's say I wanted to do video modeling on increasing turn taking. So turn taking would be my desired behavior that I want to change. And video modeling, just so for those of you who don't know what video modeling is, it's pretty much that the child watches a video of the target behavior and then they have to display that target behavior in natural settings. The video modeling would be my independent variable, right? So I'm measuring this child, the child I'm working with, in a baseline period, in a period prior to the video modeling intervention. And I'm measuring to see if he's sharing. So I'm looking at the opportunities he has to share and the percentage of times that he shares. That would be the baseline. And then after a few days where I see it's consistent, he's not doing it, then I would go into my intervention. And with my intervention, I would play the video model and then see if the behavior is increasing over time, if the child's starting to share more. Now what you want to see is in baseline, you want to see the child not doing it, and then the intervention it's doing it. And you're seeing that increasing trend. They're not sharing and then they're sharing. And the better you have, the more stability you have in baseline, the less times they do it in baseline, the better levels that they're doing it in, more consistent levels. You're going to be saying, you know what, I believe that my intervention made a difference. So what Beowulf and Risley are really talking about is controlling your environment, exercising control over the environment. It's similar to in this room. I can't do it in this room because it's a Wi-Fi setting, lights, and I don't want to mess it up. But I know in like my house, when I turn on and off the switch, when I turn on, the lights go on, it's my turning on the switch that did it. It's not some confounding variable in the environment. It's my behavior flipping on the switch or flipping off the switch. This is what we want to see in intervention. We want to know it's the intervention that you guys as RBTs are implementing, that it's controlling behavior, it's changing behavior, not some confounding variable, which could be medicine or watching TV or something going over the time. The fourth dimension is technological. Technological means we have to have good operational definitions. We have to be able to describe the behavior and the procedures in a way that others can replicate, that others can read it and replicate those procedures. Operational definitions are critical. So, for example, if I was to ask everyone in the room and everyone in the video, how do you define a tantrum? There would be different definitions. So, for example, if I have one person said a tantrum's this, another person said tantrum's this, and a child tantrums, you might not get any reliability. This person over here would mark that the child did engage in a tantrum, and this person over here would mark that the child did not engage in a tantrum. And so you have to have a clear operational definition so that two independent evaluators, two independent recorders can look and say, yep, I agree that this is the behavior, and this behavior is occurring or not occurring. It's also important that when you do operational definitions, you have in the procedures. You want to lay out what the components of those procedures so that we can better train people on it. Now, a way to get a good operational definition is it takes time. It's not an easy thing. What you have to do is write it and test it out probably. So what I've done in the past is 2 or 3 people have written a definition, they've watched a video, they say this captured it, this did not capture it, we missed this, and then they practice scoring. And once 3 people get kind of a consensus, then they're going to give it to some independent RBTs or some independent BCBAs and ask them to use it and see if it's scoring correctly and accurately. So it's absolutely critical that we're technological, that we have operational definitions of our procedures and of the behaviors that we're attempting to change. I think we have to be conceptually systematic. This is another important one. And this means that we're tying it back to the principles of applied behavior analysis, the principles of our science. What my big concern is, and my colleagues' big concern is, sometimes RBTs and behavior analysts do not know what the principles of our science are. They understand the procedures, but they do not know the principles. And if we don't know the principles and we can't tie in the principles, then we're just a bag of tricks. And we don't want to just be a bag of tricks and we're going to house or school to school with a bag of tricks. We want to be a science. We need to be a science. And because of that, we need to tie everything we're doing into various conceptual systems. Effective. We must be effective, everyone. We must be effective. If we're not effective, then there's no point of what we're doing. We have to be effective. But what constitutes effectiveness? Effectiveness does not just mean that the child learns something, or the child decreases his or her aberrant behavior. Effectiveness means that you're making a meaningful change, and that's efficient. That's efficient compared to other procedures. So for example, if I had the teaching interaction procedure, which we'll learn about later, it's a way to teach social behavior, and let's say social stories, another way to teach social behavior, and we're comparing them, if both of them are effective, if both of them are changing behavior in the desired direction, that's great. But what we need to look is what's the most efficient. What is going to be quicker for the child to learn the various behaviors that he or she is learning. So effective, it means not just what's effective, but that that the procedure is more effective than other procedures. It's also important that when we're looking at effective, that's a meaningful change. We want to make sure it's an actual meaningful change. And then finally, generality. It is so important that our children are generalizing their behaviors to other settings, other people. It does not matter what they can do with just one instructor or one RBT. It matters that when you teach them how to share with you, that they can start doing it at home, and that they can start doing with their peers. It means if you're teaching them to label pictures of their mom, their dad, their places in their environment, kitchen, bathroom, whatever it may be, that they just don't do it when they see 3D or 2D cards. That they see that when they go in their house, when they see other things, that they can expressively label it as well. Generality is critical, and we will talk about generality in a little later time. So what Beowulf and Risley did was really lay out the systems for us, and what constitutes applied behavior analysis, and the ways that we should proceed as a field. Now, there's other brilliant behavior analysts at the time who are doing such important work and have really influenced what we do today. And I'm just going to show a few highlights now. We'll get into much more later on as we progress through the modules. So one of them, or three of them, being once again Wolf, Risley, and Mies, did a really early application of our science for an autistic child. This autistic child in the study is really known, or at least known to me as the Dickey study, where they showed the procedures of reinforcement and shaping, and how this can really develop appropriate behaviors like wearing glasses for this child, Dickey. This was a brilliant study, and it's one of the first studies that really looked at our science for individuals with autism spectrum disorder. There's a ton of work in the 60s, not for individuals with autism, but for typically developmental children. Children who were either assigned to be pre-delinquent youth, which means that they did not face any charges, but they were close to, or those who were delinquent. So one of my favorite kinds of studies is Achievement Place and the Teaching Family Model, which really took these pre-delinquent youth or delinquent youth and taught them pro-social skills using things like the token economy and the teaching interaction procedure and family meals. This was so important in changing socially significant behavior and helping children who would end up incarcerated out of jail. So Phillips and then later Wolf and others really made it so that the Achievement Place really is kind of that beacon on the hill of a way to teach pre-delinquent youth. It's also very much different than individuals with autism, but those same procedures, the same principles that are done in Achievement Place can be done in clinical settings for individuals with autism. I also want to say Achievement Place led the way to places like Boys Town and Boys and Girls Town model, which is commonly implemented today. Ione and Azrin really looked at how to identify reinforcers how to effectively identify reinforcers, and how to use tokens. Today I see token economies used all the time. As I said, some of the best teachers do apply behavior analysis and don't know they're doing it. Some of the best teachers use token economies and know nothing about the work of Ione and Azard, but that's where it came from. Tokens can be used so effectively to help change behavior. And so this is some of the early work, and I'm going through this really quickly. I realize I encourage you guys to read this work, to go back and read the original studies, because they're so powerful. The next one is one of my favorite studies. It's not really a study, it's a commentary, a description, and it was by Mont Wolf. It was 78, so 10 years after that pivotal article, Some Current Dimensions, that I just went over. In here, Wolf describes the need for subjective measurement, the need to be socially valid, meaning that we have to be concerned that our procedures are effective in what the people want, what society wants, what the client wants. And also importantly, that we made meaningful changes to the learners, that we're making meaningful progress. This is one of the most important articles I've ever read. It's my favorite article. Not just because I'm from the University of Kansas, because I think of its importance to what we do. We have to make sure we're targeting the right behaviors. We have to make sure that we're striving for meaningful outcomes. We have to make sure that our children are improving. And I think Wolf really describes a way of doing it. So these are some of the earlier works, and I'm going to talk about two more studies and really go into how is it done for individuals diagnosed with autism. Lovaas, Cagle, and Simmons and Long were one of the first studies to look at comprehensive behavioral intervention as it related to individuals diagnosed with autism. So in this study, they were looking at long-term comprehensive behavioral intervention to 20 individuals diagnosed with autism. And they were looking at different improvements, and I will walk you through the graph in the areas that they were looking at. So on the x-axis, you see the areas, the y is percent of occurrence. There's three letters. There's B, which stands for before intervention, A, after intervention, and F for a longer-term follow-up. Okay? And so you see that they were focusing on self-stimulation, echolalia, appropriate verbal behavior, social nonverbal behavior, and appropriate play. Now in this group, in this study, there's two groups of children. There's a group that was a parent group and a group that was an institution group. And what this means is after the intervention, if you're a parent group, you went back into either with your parents or with providers, caretakers that really understood the principles of behavior analysis. The institution group, you did not. You just went back into an institution where those principles are not being implemented. So if you look at self-stimulation as the first one, you see they're very close, no real differences prior to intervention. You see a drop on both. So self-stimulatory behavior is going down. Now this is important because self-stimulatory behavior can interfere with learning. It could also be socially stigmatizing. So a lot of times we want to look to decrease inappropriate self-stimulatory behavior, especially when it's interfering with learning. They both go down, as I just said. But look after on follow-up. Those who went to the institutions, their self-stimulatory behavior rose. And those who stayed in the parents, it continued to decrease. Let's look at echolalia, which is another form of stereotypy. You see that the groups are similar. They go down. But at long-term follow-up, those who were in the institution, their echolalia rose, while those in the parent group continue to decrease. This is what you want to see for the parent group. Okay, now this is the behavior you want to go up. You see appropriate verbal behavior, similar. During intervention, right after intervention, they both increase. We want to see that. That's good. We want these ones to increase. And then what you see is the parent to continue to increase, but those kids who went back to the institution decreased. That's not what you want to see. Okay, social nonverbal behavior, similar. The ones in the institution made a huge jump compared to those in the parent group. But after long-term follow-up, you see, you see that they decrease their social nonverbal behavior, and a slight decrease for the ones of the parent, but not as much. And then finally, appropriate play. There's a little differentiation here. Both go up For those in the parent group, they continue to grow up, and for those in the institution, it has a quick drop down. So what does this mean? Why is this important? First, it means that it showed that comprehensive behavioral intervention was effective. That was effective in changing a variety of behaviors for individuals diagnosed with autism. So this is one of the first studies that was able to show that it was indeed effective. Second, though, unfortunately, or not unfortunately for these clients, but at least I understand it and it makes sense to me, it showed that if you're not in an environment, if you're not in a behavioral environment, then those behaviors aren't maintaining over time. So it's really important that you put children in environments where they are coming in contact with reinforcement, and they are coming in contact with corrective feedback, or otherwise known as punishment, and that our environments are conducive to good learning. This also led the way to the importance of parent training and the importance of getting parents on board and understanding our principles. So this was a pivotal study, which really led to the most famous study. And the reason why I think most of us are here, most of you guys are watching on video, and that's the Lovaas 87 study, the outcome study that everybody knows about. Let me show you the outcome study. In this study, there are 38 children. They're independently diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. So this is not the Lovaas or the people working at UCLA Young Autism Project. That's where the study took place. These were independent diagnosticians or psychologists diagnosing children as having autism or not having autism. If they didn't have autism, they were not part of the study. The participants in the study began treatment before 4 years of age, so they were under age 4. Now, 19 of the children received an average of 40 hours of formal quality ABA intervention a week. And I want to highlight the word average. It was an average. It was not 40 hours a week. It was an average of 40 hours a week. So some children received 20 and some children could possibly receive 60 hours. It was just dependent upon their individual needs. The other part of it was formal ABA, meaning in this study, their parents were required. One parent was required to be almost a full-time therapist. They were there at sessions, they learned about the procedures. In fact, when students at UCLA went off for summer breaks or winter breaks, they were the ones implementing the interventions. And my understanding, talking to people on the project, Dr. Ron Leaf, Dr. John McCacken, Dr. Tracy Parker, was that the parents actually became better than a lot of the staff, which is not surprising because they really know their own child and they know the principles of our science. So it's an average of 40 formal hours a week, but it also had a lot of informal hours as well, stuff that parents were doing once the therapists were gone. And the word quality. This was quality intervention. This is the type of intervention that parents should strive for getting their children. It was absolute quality. Now this was compared to the other group, which were 19 children, received an average of 10 hours of formal quality ABA intervention a week. So the difference here is it goes from an average of 40 to an average of 10, and other treatments, meaning it was an eclectic approach. So they could have SLP treatments or OT treatments or other kinds of therapies. So the real difference was not only the hours, but also in the treatment approach, the intensive approach, it was only ABA. In the non-intensive, it could be ABA and other forms of treatment. They received intervention for 2 or more years. So 2 or more years. Now, this is a grant-funded study, so eventually children left. This is not an indication by any means that intervention should only be 2 years or 1 year or 18 months, but in this study they received intervention for 2 or more years. And intervention occurred at the home, school, and community. So a lot of times today we hear that intervention should only occur at home or only occur in school. And we get fights. There are people that fight, no, I only want a home program. No, it needs to be done in school. This makes no sense to me. Intervention should be occurring every place that the child's in. We should be having intervention in the home, in the school, and the community like Lovaas did in his 87 study. Now, he evaluated these children on 3 categories. You could have either been in the poor outcome, the fair outcome, or the best outcome. And this looked upon 3 different areas, 3 different domains: IQ, school placement, and diagnosis. So in terms of IQ, if you had a profound or severe IQ, which was measured objectively through cognitive tests, then you'd be in the poor range. If you had moderate to mild impairments, you'd be in the fair range. And if you had normal range of intelligence, so you were within 1 standard deviation of the normal range of IQ, you were in the best outcome range. For school placement, to be in the poor, you had to have classes. You had to be assigned at the end of the study for a class for individuals with autism. For the fair, you would be in a special education class other than autism. So it was not an autism only class, it would be a different kind of special education classroom. And to be in the best, you had to be in general education without any supports. This meant no IEP. This meant no help. This meant no shadow, no para. You were in there without any supports. And finally, he looked at diagnosis. To have a poor outcome, you have to, at the end of the study, have still an autism diagnosis by those independent diagnosticians. For the fair, you have to have a diagnosis other than autism spectrum disorder. So it could be ADHD, or it could be depression, or anxiety. And to be in the best, you have to be indistinguishable, which means you did not have a DSM diagnosis when you were finished with the study. Now to do this, he took whatever your worst category was. So for example, if you had a profound and severe IQ, but you were in general education without support, and somehow you were indistinguishable, you would be in the poor category. So if you had normal range of IQ, general education without support, but you still had a diagnosis of depression, you would be in the fair category. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. It really is whatever your worst category was. And so the study, one of the critiques of the study is they really didn't have autism, or the outcomes weren't really that good. They all had autism, and they were all in this poor category because they started off the study having autism. So Ivar looked at these 3 groups, and he did the 2 groups I talked about, the average of 40 hours of ABA only, and the average of 10 hours in eclectic approach. They added on a 3rd group. This was a non-treatment group, a 0 hours of intervention and an eclectic approach. So let's look at the numbers. So what we find is in the average 40-hour group, the intensive group, they had 2 in the poor, 8 in the fair, and 9 in the best. Now I want you to keep in mind that all the students would have ended up, all 19 students started in the poor. So they moved 47% over to the best outcome group. And in addition, I think around 40%, 45% or so in the fair. This is tremendous improvement for these individuals. This is socially significant. This is meaningful improvement. Well, let's compare how it did to the average of 10 hours. Well, you look here, the majority of the students stayed in the poor. 8 of them did move to the fair, but not 1 student reached best outcome. Now, there's no way of knowing this, but people on the project I've heard, they think they would have moved these children at least 1 more over. So in the average of 10, the fair group that had 8, they would have moved over to the best, and the 11 would have moved over to the fair. So this shows that if I'm looking at these numbers and I'm objectively reading the study, it shows just the difference of that intensive behavioral intervention, what it can make, the long-term, life-altering effects it could have. Especially when you compare it to children who didn't receive any intervention. 10 stayed in the poor, 10 went to the fair, and 1 went to the best. This highlights how important comprehensive behavioral intervention is for individuals diagnosed with autism and their family. I'd like to show you a video of one of these students and the difference it makes in his life.
Ian had no words or communicative gestures. He had severe tantrums. He ignored and looked past people. He spun objects, flapped his hands, laughed excessively and inappropriately, and assumed fixed and rigid body positions for prolonged periods of time. With intensive treatment, Ian's IQ at follow-up rose more than 40 points to the normal range.
Well, when we found out about his problems, we were told that he would probably be institutionalized at some point in his life, and we couldn't accept that, really. And it was grueling, really. I mean, because it was, I would say about 5 years that the therapy, 2 years very intensive therapy, another 3 of consistent, hard therapy, and you could see him daily changing. And that's what kept you going.
Here, 5 years after treatment, Ian is indistinguishable from his friends. His identity will not be disclosed.
How do you like 6th grade so far? It's pretty cool. It's a lot better than 5th grade. I know. Kindergarten was boring. I know. We had to just do little pace, little things like that.
The boys were asked to talk about their lives.
It's scary, but it's fun. I know. The work isn't that tough. I know. It's just that sometimes the homework. Yeah. One thing good about it is older kids can't pick on you because there aren't any. I know. What do you want to do when you grow up? There's a lot of things. I'm going to be a jet pilot, jet designer, or an architect. I'm going to be an actor and a keyboard player and a surfer. Yeah, that'd be cool to be a keyboard player, especially you since you're so good at the keyboard. Yeah. You should play guitar if you wanted. Yeah, maybe I should. Yeah, you play good at that too, especially shaking a baby. Do you think college is going to be fun? Yeah, it's going to be pretty cool. Yeah. That's where you usually find your girls that you marry. When are you going to get married? I don't know, but I don't want to get married right now, even if I was able to, because it doesn't seem fun right now, you know. Probably after college. That would be a cool time. Yeah. About 24, I'd say. Yeah, year after I move out. That's gonna be me and all those parties too at college. Oh yeah. Get to drink beer and everything, sneak the booze. But
He did drink the booze. He did have fun. He lived a quality life. This is a child, when they started intervention, they were screaming, kicking, didn't have any language. You can see the power that a behavior intervention has. You can see the tremendous difference we make in the lives of individuals diagnosed with autism and their family. A few years ago, my colleagues and I wanted to look at our program, look at Autism Partnership, and look to see the outcomes that we have. Now I have to say this is not an experimental study. The Lobos 87 study was an experimental study. This was more of just a programmatic description of what we do, of the Autism Partnership method, before it was called the Autism Partnership method. The method that you guys will be learning about in the next 38 hours or so. What we did is we looked at our method, how we're implementing intervention to individuals diagnosed with autism, around 4 of our sites worldwide. We looked at our United States side, our Seal Beach site where we're presenting today. We looked at our offices in Hong Kong, Melbourne, Australia, and the United Kingdom. In total, we had 64 individuals that we evaluated. 64 individuals who had intensive behavioral intervention. What we did is we looked at 2 different groups. We looked at and looked to see if the children were able to meet the category, if they were able to meet the results of the Lobos study, if they met that definition. That is group 1. By that, they had to have no diagnosis. They had to be in general education without any support, and IQs in the normal range. And what we found across our 4 offices was that 39% of our participants met that definition. These are numbers similar to the Lobos study, findings of the Lobos study, that they can meet best outcome when they receive quality behavioral intervention. But we also wanted to look at a different group, a different dimension. And this is what we call group 1R. In the group 1R, what we're looking for are those who have normal IQs, who are indistinguishable on assessments and diagnosis, but who might receive some support. And by some support, maybe they get a little extra time in homework. Maybe they get counseling in the school. It's not where they have a full-blown IEP or where they're having a shadow in the classroom. It's that they have a little additional support. And we thought this was so critical because back in the 80s and the 70s when Lobos was conducting his study, you didn't want children to get the supports. It could be stigmatizing or damning to them later on in life. Today, times have changed. So having a little additional support is quite common in schools and school districts today. So we looked at children that failed to meet group 1 criterion. And what they ended up was 31% met group 1R criterion. So that's an additional 31%. So our total of those reaching best outcome in this very small programmatic description was 70%. Think about that. If you implement quality behavioral intervention, these are the type of outcomes that could happen. That your children can make meaningful improvements. And this is why we're giving this 40-hour training. This is why we think it's so important to raise the standards of the RBT. Because we know what we can do, and we know the effects we can have for children with autism and their families. So this ends this portion of Module 1.